Hey there, you looking kinda cute. Don't forget to subscribe and check out my other socials for more. Enjoy. The clang of metal on metal echoed through the gym as Houston racked the barbell. Sweat glistened on his bulging muscles, each perfectly defined and sculpted from years of dedicated training. He caught a glimpse of himself in the mirror. Broad shoulders, thick chest, washboard abs. The epitome of masculinity stared back at him. But inside, Houston felt anything but masculine. He grabbed his gym bag and headed for the locker room, nodding at the other regulars as he passed. Everyone knew Houston here. He was a fixture, spending hours each day pushing his body to its limits. What they didn't know was that it was all a carefully constructed facade. In the shower, Houston let the hot water cascade over his muscular frame. He closed his eyes, allowing himself a brief moment to imagine soft fabric caressing his skin instead of the harsh spray. The fantasy was fleeting. He couldn't indulge those thoughts here. Dressed in baggy sweats and a hoodie that did little to hide his impressive physique, Houston left the gym and climbed into his truck. The drive home was a blur, his mind consumed by the ever-present internal conflict. He pulled into the driveway of his modest suburban home and sat for a moment, staring at the perfectly manicured lawn. To anyone passing by, it was the picture of normalcy. If only they knew the turmoil that raged behind those walls. Inside, Houston went through the motions of his evening routine. Protein shake, meal prep for tomorrow. A quick scan of his social media, filled with posts about upcoming bodybuilding competitions and supplement ads. Nothing that spoke to the real Houston. He flopped onto the couch, flipping aimlessly through channels before settling on a mindless action movie. The protagonist was a muscle-bound hero, saving the day through sheer brute force. Houston should have felt a kinship with the character. Instead, he felt a deep, gnawing emptiness. As the credits rolled, Houston found himself in front of his bedroom mirror. He struck a classic bodybuilding pose, biceps flexed, chest puffed out. The image staring back at him was everything society told him a man should be. So why did it feel so wrong? With a heavy sigh, Houston crawled into bed. Sleep eluded him, as it often did these days. His mind raced with forbidden desires and crushing guilt. He tossed and turned, tangling himself in the sheets as he fought against his true nature. When Houston finally drifted off, his dreams were a confusing mess of muscles and makeup, barbells and lace. He woke feeling even more exhausted than when he'd gone to bed. The next few days passed in a haze of monotony. Work at the construction site, gym, home, repeat. Houston went through the motions, his smile never quite reaching his eyes. His co-workers noticed his subdued demeanor, but chalked it up to overtraining. No one suspected the real reason for his melancholy. It was Friday night when things came to a head. Houston sat alone in his living room, nursing a protein shake and scrolling through his phone. An ad for a local drag show popped up, and he found himself staring at the image of men in elaborate dresses and full makeup. His thumb hovered over the screen, torn between desire and fear. With a frustrated growl, Houston hurled his phone across the room. It bounced off the couch and clattered to the floor. He buried his face in his hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "I can't do this anymore," he whispered to the empty room. Houston stumbled to his feet, mind reeling. He needed to get out, to escape the suffocating weight of his own expectations. Without thinking, he grabbed his keys and headed for the door. The cool night air hit him like a slap to the face as he stepped outside. Houston took a deep breath, trying to clear his head. He had no destination in mind, just an overwhelming urge to be anywhere but here. He wandered aimlessly through the quiet streets of his neighborhood. Houses glowed with warm light, families settling in for the evening. Houston felt like an outsider looking in, disconnected from the world around him. His feet carried him to a nearby park. The playground equipment stood silent and empty in the moonlight. Houston sank onto a bench, the wood creaking under his substantial weight. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to truly feel the pain he'd been suppressing. Tears flowed freely down his cheeks as he confronted the truth he'd been running from for so long. "I just want to be me," he choked out between sobs. "Why can't I just be me?" Houston lost track of how long he sat there, pouring out years of pent-up emotion. When the tears finally subsided, he felt drained but somehow lighter. The world around him seemed sharper, more real than it had in ages. With a deep breath, Houston stood and began the long walk home. His steps were heavy, but there was a newfound resolve in his heart. Something had to change. He couldn't go on living a lie. Back in his bedroom, Houston stared at his reflection once more. This time, he didn't see the paragon of masculinity. He saw a man trapped by society's expectations, desperate to break free. "No more," he whispered to his mirror image. "I can't do this anymore." Exhausted physically and emotionally, Houston crawled into bed. For once, sleep came easily, his mind too tired to fight against itself. When Houston woke the next morning, something felt different. The air in the room seemed charged with possibility. He sat up, rubbing the sleep from his eyes, and froze. There, draped over his closet door, was a dress. Not just any dress, but a flowing sundress in a soft yellow fabric. Houston blinked, certain he must still be dreaming. But the dress remained. Cautiously, he approached the closet. The dress was real, its material cool and silky beneath his calloused fingers. Houston's heart raced as he opened the closet door, revealing a sight that took his breath away. Where there had once been a collection of baggy t-shirts and gym clothes, there now hung an array of feminine attire. Skirts in various lengths and styles, blouses in delicate fabrics, even a pair of high heels nestled on the floor. Houston stumbled backward, mind reeling. This couldn't be real. He must be hallucinating, driven mad by years of repression, and yet, with trembling hands, he reached for the yellow sundress. It was his size, impossibly, perfectly his size. Houston clutched the garment to his chest, feeling the softness against his skin. Tears welled in his eyes, but this time they were tears of joy. Before he could second-guess himself, Houston slipped the dress over his head. The fabric settled around him, caressing his muscular frame in a way he'd only ever dreamed of. He turned to the mirror, hardly daring to look. The sight that greeted him was breathtaking. The dress hugged his broad shoulders and chest before flowing gracefully over his narrow waist. The hem fell just above his knees, revealing legs that were powerful yet somehow elegant in this new context. Houston twirled, watching the skirt billow out around him. For the first time in his life, he felt truly beautiful. A laugh bubbled up from deep within him, pure and joyous. Still giddy with disbelief, Houston rummaged through the closet. He found a pair of sandals that fit his large feet perfectly. A delicate necklace that somehow didn't look out of place against his muscular neck. Even a tube of lip gloss that he applied with shaking hands. Fully dressed, Houston stared at his reflection. The juxtaposition of his masculine physique and the feminine clothing should have been jarring. Instead, it felt right in a way nothing ever had before. "This is me," he whispered, voice choked with emotion. "This is who I am." The spell was broken by the harsh buzz of his phone. Houston jumped, suddenly remembering the world outside his bedroom. Panic set in as he realized he had plans to meet friends for breakfast. He should change, put on his usual attire, and pretend this magical morning never happened. But the thought of hiding himself away again was unbearable. With a deep breath, Houston made a decision. He was done living a lie. Whatever consequences came, he would face them as his true self. Heart pounding, he grabbed his keys and headed for the door. The walk to his truck felt like the longest of his life. Houston was acutely aware of every swish of fabric against his legs, every jingle of his necklace. He climbed into the driver's seat, adjusting the dress around his thick thighs. For a moment, he sat frozen, hands gripping the steering wheel. This was his last chance to turn back. "No!" Houston said firmly. "No more hiding." He started the engine and pulled out of the driveway. The familiar streets of his neighborhood took on a new quality as he drove, the world seeming brighter and more vibrant. As he approached the diner where he was meeting his friends, Houston's anxiety returned full force. What would they say? How would they react? Would this be the end of friendships he'd had for years? He parked and took a deep, steadying breath. Whatever happened, he knew he was making the right choice. With newfound confidence, Houston stepped out of the truck. And that's when he noticed something strange. Across the street, a group of men were walking together. One wore a flowing maxi skirt. Another had on a crop top that showed off his abs. A third sported a pair of high heels that clicked against the pavement. Houston blinked, certain he must be seeing things. But as he looked around, he realized it wasn't just that group. Everywhere he looked, men were dressed in a mix of masculine and feminine clothing. A businessman in a suit and tie carried a glittery purse. A jogger ran past in leggings and a sports bra, his beard neatly trimmed. Confusion warred with elation in Houston's mind. Had the world changed overnight? Or had it always been this way and he'd been too afraid to see it? Before he could process this bizarre turn of events, a familiar voice called out to him, "Hey, Houston, over here!" He turned to see his friend Mike waving from the diner's outdoor seating area. Mike wore cargo shorts paired with a floral blouse, looking completely at ease. In a daze, Houston made his way over to the table. His other friends, Tom and Chris, greeted him warmly. Tom's muscular arms were on full display in a sleeveless dress, while Chris had opted for skinny jeans and a crop top. "Love the dress, man," Chris said, giving Houston an approving nod. "Yellow is definitely your color." Houston sank into an empty chair, mind reeling. "Thanks," he managed to say. It's new." "Well, it looks great on you," Mike chimed in. "Really brings out your eyes." The conversation flowed naturally from there, his friends chatting about work and weekend plans as if nothing was out of the ordinary. Houston listened in stunned silence, waiting for someone to acknowledge the strangeness of the situation. But no one did. Men in dresses and skirts passed by their table without a second glance. A waiter in a kilt took their order. Even the women seemed unfazed by the blurring of gender norms all around them. As his friends debated the merits of various brunch cocktails, Houston excused himself to use the restroom. He splashed cold water on his face, half expecting to wake up from this surreal dream. But when he looked in the mirror, he was still there. Still Houston, still in a yellow sundress, still himself for the first time in his life. A man in a pencil skirt and button-down shirt entered, nodding politely as he passed. Houston watched in amazement as he touched up his lipstick before heading back out. Slowly, the reality of the situation began to sink in. Somehow, overnight, the world had transformed into a place where men were free to express themselves however they chose. Where masculinity and femininity weren't rigid categories, but fluid concepts to be explored. Houston returned to the table, a grin spreading across his face. His friends were deep in conversation about an upcoming music festival. "I can't decide what to wear," Tom was saying. "I'm thinking maybe that new maxi dress I bought, but I'm worried it might be too hot." "Why not go with a romper?" Chris suggested. "Cute, but still breathable." Houston jumped in, surprising himself with his eagerness. "What about a sundress like this one? It's really comfortable in the heat." His friends nodded approvingly, and just like that, Houston was part of the conversation. They discussed outfits and accessories with the same enthusiasm they once reserved for protein powders and workout routines. As they finished their meals and prepared to leave, Houston felt a warmth spreading through his chest. For the first time in his life, he felt truly seen and accepted. "Hey," Mike said as they stood to go. "A bunch of us are going shopping later. Want to come? I know this great boutique that carries sizes for guys with more muscle." Houston beamed. "I'd love to." The rest of the day passed in a whirlwind of activity. Houston tried on dresses, skirts, and blouses. marveling at how each item made him feel more like himself. His friends offered encouragement and advice, helping him build a wardrobe that reflected his true identity. As the sun began to set, they said their goodbyes. Houston drove home, his truck filled with shopping bags and his heart full of joy. Back in his bedroom, he carefully hung up his new clothes. The mysterious items that had appeared that morning were still there, seamlessly blending with his recent purchases. Houston changed into a silky nightgown, reveling in the feeling of the fabric against his skin. As he crawled into bed, he felt a peace he'd never known before. Whatever strange magic had brought about this change, he was grateful. In this new world, or perhaps it had always been this way and he'd just been blind to it, Houston could finally be himself. As he drifted off to sleep, a smile played on his lips. Tomorrow was a new day, full of possibilities, and for the first time in his life, Houston couldn't wait to face it as his true self. The weeks that followed were a period of joyous discovery for Houston. Each day brought new opportunities to explore his identity and express himself in ways he'd only ever dreamed of. At work, he traded his usual t-shirts and jeans for flowing blouses and wide-legged trousers. His co-workers complimented his new style, and Houston found himself engaging in conversations about fashion and self-expression that would have been unthinkable before. Even at the gym, traditionally a bastion of hypermasculinity, Houston noticed a shift. Men worked out in crop tops and leggings, their muscular bodies adorned with delicate jewelry. He started incorporating yoga and dance classes into his routine, reveling in the grace and fluidity they brought to his movements. One particularly memorable day, Houston decided to wear a form-fitting dress to the gym. As he sat up at the squat rack, he caught his reflection in the mirror. The juxtaposition of his bulging muscles and the delicate floral print made him smile. A fellow gym-goer approached, admiring Houston's outfit. "That dress is amazing," the man said, adjusting his own sports bra. "Where did you get it?" Houston beamed, launching into an enthusiastic description of the boutique he'd discovered. As they chatted between sets, he marveled at how natural it felt. This was the camaraderie he'd always sought, but never quite found in traditional masculine spaces. As the weeks turned into months, Houston's confidence grew. He experimented with makeup, learning to accentuate his strong features with subtle contouring and bold lip colors. He even started growing out his hair, enjoying the feel of it brushing against his shoulders. His social life blossomed in ways he never expected. Houston found himself attending drag shows, not as a spectator, but as a participant. The first time he performed on stage, dressed in a glittering gown that highlighted every curve of his muscular frame, he felt a rush unlike anything he'd experienced in bodybuilding competitions. The audience cheered as Houston lip-synced and danced, his powerful movements softened by the grace he'd cultivated in his yoga classes. As the song ended and he struck a pose, Houston felt truly alive. This was who he was meant to be. Strong yet soft, powerful yet graceful. Even his dating life, long neglected due to his internal struggles, began to flourish. Houston started seeing a kind-hearted man named David who appreciated both Houston's physical strength and his newfound vulnerability. Their first date was a picnic in the park. Houston wore a sundress similar to the one that had started this journey, while David opted for a flowy shirt and shorts. As they spread out the blanket and unpacked their meal, Houston marveled at how comfortable he felt. "You know," David said, pouring them each a glass of wine, "I've always admired how you balance your masculine and feminine sides. It's really inspiring." Houston blushed, the compliment warming him more than the summer sun. "Thank you," he replied. "It's been a journey, but I finally feel like I'm being true to myself." As they talked and laughed, Houston realized that this was what he'd been missing all along. Not just the freedom to express himself, but the ability to form genuine connections with others. By embracing all aspects of himself, he'd opened up a world of possibilities. Months turned into a year, and Houston's transformation became more than just external. The internal conflict that had plagued him for so long faded away, replaced by a deep sense of self-acceptance and peace. On the anniversary of that fateful morning when he'd discovered the mysterious clothes in his closet, Houston decided to celebrate. He invited his closest friends over for a dinner party, eager to share his joy with the people who had supported him throughout his journey. As he prepared for the evening, Houston took a moment to reflect. He stood before the mirror, just as he had countless times before. But now, the person staring back at him was whole, integrated, true. He wore a custom-made dress that showcased his muscular build while embracing his feminine side. His hair, now past his shoulders, was styled in soft waves. A touch of makeup enhanced his strong features without obscuring them. Houston smiled at his reflection, feeling a surge of gratitude for whatever force had brought about this change in his life and in the world around him. The doorbell rang, signaling the arrival of his first guests. Houston took a deep breath, smoothed his dress, and went to greet them. The evening was filled with laughter, good food, and heartfelt conversations. As Houston looked around at his friends, a diverse group of individuals expressing themselves in myriad ways, he felt a profound sense of belonging. Later, as the party wound down, Houston found himself alone in the kitchen with David. They stood side by side at the sink, washing dishes in comfortable silence. "You seem happy," David observed, bumping Houston's hip playfully with his own. Houston smiled, setting down the plate he'd been drying. "I am," he said simply. "Happier than I ever thought possible." David turned to face him, his expression soft. "I'm glad," he said. "You deserve it, to be happy, to be yourself." Houston felt a lump form in his throat, overwhelmed by the sincerity in David's words. Two men, one in a dress and one in a skirt, standing close in the warm light of the kitchen. It was an image that would have once seemed impossible to Houston. Now, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. "Thank you," Houston said softly, "for seeing me, the real me." David smiled, taking Houston's hand in his own. "Thank you for letting me see you," he replied. As they rejoined their friends in the living room, Houston felt a sense of completeness he'd never known before. This was his life now, full of color, expression, and love. A life where he could be strong and soft, masculine and feminine, fully and unapologetically himself. Whatever magic had brought about this change, Houston was grateful. He had found his truth, his happiness, his home, and he knew, with absolute certainty, that he would never go back to hiding again. As the night wore on and friends began to depart, Houston stood in his doorway, waving goodbye. The cool evening breeze rustled the hem of his dress, and he took a moment to savor the feeling. This was freedom. This was joy. This was life as it was meant to be lived. With a contented sigh, Houston closed the door and turned back to his home. The future stretched out before him, full of possibilities. And for the first time in his life, he was ready to embrace every single one of them. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to check out my other socials if you want more wonderful content, early access, behind the scenes, and more. All links down below.